This is BBC One. Now the BBC News with Sian Williams.
The plane hijack in Afghanistan. The gunmen demand $200 million. And they refuse an appeal to free the women and children on board. Could this be the man to be the latest Nazi war criminal sheltering here? And England on top as 10 South African wickets fall in a day. Good evening. The hijackers of the Indian Airlines plane, now on the ground in southern Afghanistan, have demanded the release of more than 35 Kashmiri separatists and a ransom of $200 million. Indian negotiators trying to free the 160 people held captive at Kandahar airport say the hijackers are refusing to let the mothers and children on board leave.
India said its negotiators were trying to find out exactly what the hijackers were seeking in return for the hostages' release. When the details emerged after a meeting of the cabinet in Delhi, they amounted to a considerable hardening of the demands first reported.
Release of 35 others, return of the coffin of the terrorist Sajjad Afghani, a payment by India of US dollars 200 million.
The Foreign Minister urged India and the international community to reflect on the demands. The government's had to face criticism at home that its response to the hijack has been ineffective. It will be hoping this will temper the criticism. But it's still the man held in this Indian jail, the cleric Mansoor Azhar, who will probably remain symbolically at the centre of this crisis. In Kandahar, the Taliban make their presence felt around the hijacked plane. They've continued to warn that they would storm the aircraft if any more of the hostages are harmed. There have apparently been no fresh deadlines set by the hijackers. And after a power unit failed, making the hostages' ordeal even worse, there were some measures taken to improve conditions in the cabin. But they were about the only obvious signs of hope. And so, towards the end of yet another day, no sign of any early breakthrough. And the Indian government is still keeping its strategy extremely close to its chest. Any potential concessions, even more so. India's tributes to the cooperation of the Taliban authorities may be the most significant development at this stage. Mike Wooldridge, BBC News, Delhi.
Police have begun inquiries into claims that a suspected Nazi war criminal is living at a nursing home in Leicestershire. Campaigners for the prosecution of war criminals are urging Britain to take action against Konrad Kalles, who they claim was involved in the killing of thousands of Jews in Latvia during the war. Mr. Kalles has always denied the allegations.
Konrad Kalles, seen here in Canada in 1997, shortly before he was deported. It was the second time he'd been expelled from a country for alleged involvement in Nazi killings. The United States deported him in 1994. During the 1990s, he was also in Australia, but the authorities there decided not to put him on trial despite pressure to do so. The allegations concern his role in a notorious commando unit which murdered at least 30,000 people, mainly Jews, in Latvia and Belarus under German occupation. The Jerusalem-based Nazi hunter Ephraim Zurov alerted British police to the fact that Kalles was probably living somewhere in the Midlands.
What's surprising is that he's in Britain and that he can be put on trial according to the War Crimes Act that was passed in Britain. And that's what we're calling for. We want this man prosecuted for his crimes. It's high time that he paid for them.
Earlier this year, Anthony Savoniuk became the only person living in Britain to be convicted of war crimes. The special Scotland Yard unit, which investigated 400 cases, has now been wound up. This is where Konrad Kalles is believed to be living, a nursing home in Leicestershire. He denies the allegations against him. Two questions are being asked tonight. How did an alleged Nazi killer apparently find it so easy to enter Britain? And what action will the authorities take now that he's here? John Silverman, BBC News, at the Home Office.
Almost 100 people have been killed in the storms which have been sweeping across Europe over the past few days. France has been hardest hit. 3.5 million homes there have no electricity, and many transport services have been disrupted because of fallen trees and power lines.
A second night of storms in France, and this time it's the southwest that has borne the brunt of its awesome force. Trees have been brought down, roofs blown off, and masonry scattered. 2 million homes are without electricity, and the death toll continues to rise. In Limoges, in central France, the emergency services have been at full stretch. And at Clermont-Ferrand, debris was strewn across the town, disrupting morning traffic. Some of the most dramatic damage is to be found at Versailles, just outside Paris. Here, in the space of 2 hours, 200 years of work was more or less undone in the spectacular gardens.
I think it's the worst storm, hurricane since the beginning of Versailles, since the building of Versailles itself.
Of course, it's not just the famous landmarks that have suffered. These hurricanes have been quite indiscriminate in the devastation that they've wrought. Across France, across much of Europe, it's the same story. Strong winds across the north coast of Spain near Bilbao have hampered efforts to search for 2 sailors feared drowned. In Switzerland, heavy snow has caused huge disruption, and there are now fears of avalanches. But in western Austria, there have been 2 avalanches caused by the exceptional weather. And in Germany, 17 people have died, most of them in Baden-Württemberg. In Cochem, water levels reach nearly 2 meters in the city centre. Forecasters are hoping that the worst may now be over. John Sopel, BBC News, Paris.
The storms have also hampered efforts to clean up the oil slick caused by the tanker Erika, which sank off the French coast 2 weeks ago. Thousands of seabirds have been coated in the oil. French wildlife centres are struggling to cope. So today, hundreds of birds have been sent to the UK for treatment.
Bedraggled and bewildered, these feathered victims of the French pollution disaster arrived at Plymouth Airport this morning to be met by RSPCA officials responding to an SOS from their French counterparts. But it soon became clear that this mercy mission may have largely been in vain. Staff at the West Hatch Wildlife Hospital in Somerset, who've begun inspecting the birds, fear the vast majority are unlikely to survive their ordeal.
Well, it's grim. It really is grim. It's not only the state of the birds, you know, how much oil they've got on them, but it's the way they've been transported as well. Nothing's been done for them sort of when they've been picked up, and, well, you take 5 dead ones out of a box of 7. It's a bit depressing.
For those that can be saved, work will shortly begin on cleaning the oil off their coats. French wildlife experts had been unable to cope with the sheer numbers of affected birds, but it appears they've left their British colleagues with an almost impossible task. John Brain, BBC News.
Doctors are warning that hospitals in England may not be able to cope over the millennium period because of a lack of intensive care beds. Some NHS regions had none spare over Christmas. The government says it's aware of the pressures and has made more beds available this winter.
At this time of year, reports of pressures in intensive care aren't unusual, but doctors fear that with the Millennium celebrations only days away, additional demand could make things worse. This hospital in Liverpool, like others across the NHS, is having to rely on hospitals outside its own region for help with intensive care.
Well, the provision of beds changes from day to day and hour to hour. Currently, as of 12 o'clock today, there were no general adult intensive care beds in the northwest region.
London too is feeling the strain. Early today, the closest intensive care bed for patients there was in Eastbourne, a grave concern to doctors where millions of people are expected to flock to London in the coming days. A shortage of specialist nursing staff lies at the heart of the intensive care bed problem. Over a 24-hour period, 3 nurses are needed for each bed, and they take a long time to train. Though there's been extra investment since last year and hospitals in Scotland and Wales appear less stretched, the government admits the situation in England is tight.
We are keeping this under constant review. We have an hourly report situation. And at the end of the day, we've opened 100 extra intensive care beds this winter. We have 2,500 extra nurses in the system.
It may not yet be a crisis, but there are grave concerns, especially here in central London. With more than double the usual number of people expected here on New Year's Eve, doctors fear that increased demand in an emergency could turn what the government at the moment describes as a controlled situation into chaos. Karen Allen, BBC News.
The American rap singer Puff Daddy has been charged with the illegal possession of a weapon after police found a stolen pistol in his car. He was arrested with his girlfriend, the actress and singer Jennifer Lopez, following a shooting at a New York nightclub. She's been released without charge.
The mayhem inside this New York club began with an argument involving the rap artist Sean Puffy Combs. Guns were drawn. 3 people were wounded, including a woman shot in the face. One of Puff Daddy's entourage now stands accused of attempted murder. Combs himself and his girlfriend, actress Jennifer Lopez, escaped and led police on a high-speed chase through Manhattan before being detained. A stolen gun was found in the rapper's car. Combs and Lopez were questioned by police for nearly 12 hours. The actress was eventually released without charge. Puff Daddy now faces weapons charges, but is protesting his innocence.
I do not own a gun. I do not carry a gun. The charges and allegations against me are 100% false. Here I am. Where's my enemy?
Puff Daddy is one of America's most successful and richest entertainers, but who's also been in trouble with the police before. Jennifer Lopez rose to fame as an actress. This year, she's combined movies with her own singing career. Together, Combs and Lopez have become one of America's most celebrated couples. But as the New York police investigation continues, they now face a series of awkward questions. Stephen Sacker, BBC News, Washington.
Cricket now, and Andy Caddick has bowled England into a winning position in the 3rd test against South Africa in Durban. Caddick took a career-best 7 for 46 as England bowled South Africa out for 156 and for the first time in 5 years forced a side to follow on. By the close on day 3, South Africa were 27 without loss in their 2nd innings, still 183 runs behind.
From the outset in Durban, this was Andrew Caddick's day. He destroyed the early South African batting order, starting with Herschel Gibbs. The new batsman, Jacques Kallis, lasted only 4 more deliveries before falling in Caddick's next over for naught. Caddick claimed the 3rd of his victims in his 5th over, Gary Kirsten beaten by pace and movement off the seam. After 2 further wickets, Caddick was recalled to claim 3 in 5 balls. First, the captain, Hansie Cronje. Then Mark Boucher clean bowled for naught. And then Alan Donald, also for a duck. Sean Pollock's demise after a spirited 64 gave Caddick his 7th wicket and left South Africa unable to avoid their first follow-on for 33 years. For once, the England captain is enjoying a potentially winning position. Paul Newman, BBC News.
And that's it from me from now. Michael Burke is going to be here with the next news at 10 to 9. Have a very good evening. Bye-bye.
Good evening to you. Fortunately, the weather here is a good deal quieter than it is across much of the rest of Europe, as you may well have just seen on the news, although there is some wet and windy weather heading in towards Spain. Here, though, we have a problem, or we will have some problems from icy roads and some snow showers, more particularly in northern and western areas, which is exactly where they were a few hours ago, and they're going to continue right the way through this evening and overnight. 1 or 2 mist and fog patches perhaps in central and eastern areas, but a widespread frost that is away from some of those coasts. The day tomorrow dawns virtually the same. We'll see showers, wintry ones at that, affecting the more western and northern coastal areas of the country, still giving a centimetre or 2 of snow over some of the hills. But I think as the day wears on, most of those showers will tend to fade away. And in any case, in central and eastern areas, it will be dry and bright with a reasonable amount of sunshine. But despite that, quite a cold day, best temperatures about 4 or 5 degrees. On Thursday, and then heading up towards New Year's Eve, it looks as if it's going to get gradually milder in most parts of the country, cloudier too, with some outbreaks of rain.
Join BBC One this New Year's Eve as 2000 Today takes you around the world and into the new millennium.
Right. So who's for a pint? Half litre? Love a pickled herring.
But at 5:30, will they be cracking open the champagne in Albert Square?
It'll be fine.
I don't want fine, I want it to be perfect. At 7:05.
Join us for the grand final of 2000 to 1.
And at 8, it's back to the main question.
What if I'm making a terrible mistake?
At 9:25, Texas and Barbara Windsor join Dale Winter.
You are really spoiling us.
And then join David Attenborough, Michael Burke, the 2 Ronnies, Vic and Bob, Michael Palin and Lenny Henry as the stars come out out across the universe. In Greenwich, Jamie Theakston plays host to the Eurythmics, Simply Red and Martine McCutcheon. And at 12:35, Dale's Band. A night like no other.
I don't know what all this fuss is about.
Join BBC One as 2000 Today welcomes you to the new millennium.
This is BBC One in the North East and Cumbria. And now, look north with John Lawrence.
Good evening and welcome to Tuesday's Look North. In the headlines tonight, a young boy is still critical following a car crash which killed his brother and sister. And County Durham's budding artists face the critics. A 4-year-old boy is still fighting for his life in a Tyneside hospital following a car crash which killed his twin brother and sister. The children and their mother were being driven to a women's refuge in a police car on Boxing Day when it was hit by a Renault on the A68 at Witton-le-Weir. Investigations are being carried out on the 2 vehicles involved. 10 cars were involved in a road accident on the A1 in Gateshead this morning. It happened near the Metro Centre on the southbound carriageway near Scotswood Bridge. An elderly woman suffered neck and spinal injuries and is being treated at the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Gateshead. No one else was badly injured. It's been confirmed that a Sunderland woman has now been released from hospital after being injured in a road accident in Austria on Boxing Day. The woman suffered whiplash injuries when the holiday coach she was travelling in overturned on a mountain pass. 9 people were injured. The Prime Minister, Tony Blair, was out in his constituency today. He visited a local County Durham factory which has been building up its links with the community and encouraging artistic effort at the same time.
Volante, who make interiors for buses and trains, have only been in Trimdon Grange for 2 years, but have already forged strong links with the people that live nearby. This is the product of their latest initiative. It involved the services of a local artist, who was invited to spend several days in the factory, capturing the moods of the workplace and its workforce. And then children from Trimdon Infants were also invited in to produce their impressions too. Mr. Blair was clearly impressed.
I think it's fantastic that you've got a business here that's a thriving good business in the export markets, but they've invited in an artist and children from the local community, and it teaches the kids about business. It enlivens the whole place, and it brings the community together, and it brings business and people who work in the community closer together as well, so I think it's a great thing to do.
The North East is set for a starring role in a special book capturing the last few days of this millennium in Britain. The world-famous Magnum Photographic Agency has sent a top photographer to Tyneside in search of local characters. Annette Bartholomew reports.
Bruce Gilden is an award-winning photographer who normally works in exotic locations such as Hollywood, Cannes and New York. But when he was offered his first assignment here in the North East, it was one he couldn't refuse. Bruce has been in search of real local people. So far he's visited pubs on the quayside, St James's Park and a workingmen's club in South Shields. His aim is to capture the spirit of the region.
I'm looking for characters, things that are distinctive in the area that I go to. And since I've only been here for 1 day, here's something distinctive.
Okay.
You beat me!
Many of the photographs from the North East will be used in a book featuring 375 pictures called GM 2000. This will be published in a few weeks' time.
Football and 2 of the region's Premier teams are in action today. Newcastle were away to Leicester this afternoon. The final result 2-1 to Newcastle, with Ferguson and Shearer both scoring. And Sunderland face one of their toughest games of the season at home to Manchester United at the Stadium of Light this evening. That game starts at 8 o'clock. Finally, a look at the weather forecast, and mainly dry and clear tonight with just the odd isolated wintry shower. Another frosty night with temperatures dipping to -4 Celsius, that's 25 degrees Fahrenheit. A similar picture tomorrow, but mainly dry and sunny with moderate northwesterly winds. Temperatures will reach 5 Celsius, 41 Fahrenheit. And that's it for now. Our late news tonight is at 5 to 9. For now, bye-bye.